you talked about a hierarchy of realities, let's say, that then go from imperfection to something close to perfection, right? And maybe as human beings, as we've gained small bits of insight into this through spiritual or psychedelic practices, we've developed ideas of heaven and hell, and that's sort of how we've learned to try and understand it, right? Mm-hmm. We live in this realm that has a dash of imperfection and a dash of perfection. It's somewhere in the middle. And you said that going into a DMT experience, you can then travel into different parts of this hierarchy of reality, right? And the way I see it is that human life is one rung on that ladder. It's a good way, you've introduced that to me. That's a nice way of thinking about it. And we are stuck here because of our own human limitations. We are a biological organism, right? We can only perceive the world around us through our senses, and they can only perceive a certain bandwidth of like the electromagnetic spectrum and the spectrum of sound, and we can only perceive certain smells through what receptors can bind with molecules and all those kind of things, right? And then for me, death must just be a letting go of those human limitations, right? The physical body dies. So what we're bound by, the senses that we perceive the world that limit what we can perceive, they just dissolve and end. And then we are just sort of enveloped by the everything. Like all of that's left outside of that bandwidth that we can understand and perceive, we just go into that, whether that's traveling to a different reality on this hierarchy or just moving into the I can only, like, language just doesn't do it justice, does it? So when you say there's no birth and no death, I kind of understand what you mean, because it's sort of like we're just restricted for a while. And for some reason, these beings might want us to just have a human experience to learn stuff, or they're testing whatever. But it's just when this life ends, it's a changing of state.
It's not that you're in a particular plane and then you move to the others, but likely in some form you actually exist in the whole stack. And what happens is there can be shifts in the middle of these things, but it isn't that you then move to the other realm. There was always a kind of common existence up the stack. Because one of the bizarre things about the DMT experience is you get a sense that you also exist there. That something of whatever you are is also whatever this experience is that you're having.
Our soul moves on to the next realm.
Well, so I have the way I, after smoking DMT, you're left with a lot of questions and not answers. I'll also say that, because it just simply shows you how little you understand about everything. But you tend to want to understand and then start your own kind of investigation. My investigation led me to Buddhism. So mostly my understanding of the kind of thing you're talking about is their cycle of this samsara. They say there's this process of suffering which goes on, and you can be incarnated into all different types of realms. There's the heavenly realms, and there's hell realms and middle realms, which we're in. And all these realms, though, have the common quality that they are all impermanent. None of them that you ever go to are you actually going to stay there. You just keep getting shuffled through. And for some reason, this whole system is weighed on this thing called karma. So you just carry karma through these realms, and you can get, sort of better chance rolls on your rebirth, and you can get into some of the higher realms, but they're not going to last. And ultimately, it's a kind of karmic debt which follows you through this cycle of incarnations into various realms, because you don't necessarily need to be born back into a human realm, or even as an animal or plant. It can be into completely other realms of existence. And that this wheel just keeps going. This is samsara, until the person has attained realization, until they understand what's going on, at which point the system sort of lets them go. If you imagine this as a big machine, and the machine is really computing something, this is how I think about it now because of the DMT. So you're a piece of a computation, and it's running through these realms. And there's something that they're trying to compute. For us, it ends up being experienced as suffering. At some point, the person can transcend suffering, at which point they're sort of ejected from the loop. It's not necessary for them to be a part of the computation anymore. So the Buddhists would say when the person has attained realization, they've now left samsara, and they move into the realm of nirvana, where they'll no longer be subject to all these incarnations. That this only happens when the person still has some karmic debt.
What do you think we're in right now? Like a purgatory?
No, it's generally referred to as a kind of middle realm, because you can have pleasant experiences. You can have experiences which are indicative of the heavenly realms. So you can imagine the best part of your lives if that just kept happening. That's all there was. You're just on this loop of good experience. That would be a heavenly realm. And you can imagine the worst parts of your life just kept repeating, and that was all there was. And that would be a hell realm. So we find ourselves in a middle realm because you can oscillate between the two. Interesting from the Buddhist perspective that this is the ideal place to be to learn, because in the lower realms, the person tends to be so overwrought with grief. The person, they wouldn't necessarily be a person, of course, whatever they had incarnated in the lower realm. It's so unpleasant that they don't seek anything else. They're dealing with too many base difficulties. And in the higher realms, no one wants to get out because it feels too good. So there's the curse of this constant pleasure. So a person never becomes a Buddha in a heavenly realm because they're never motivated to sit down and practice self-realization because they have no suffering they're trying to escape from. So these middle realms offer a place where there's enough stability that you can find a place to be calm and practice, and yet you still suffer. So there's still a strong motivation there to be free of suffering. So these are the definitions of these middle realms, and we find ourselves in one of them. And it's considered a human birth is considered a very special thing in Buddhism precisely because it offers you a very rare chance to practice self-realization.
And if these sort of beings that you talked about are using our universe as a test or a sort of, I don't know, an experiment, like they're in a lab, you use sort of test tube terminology and things like that, why do you think they would place in our universe molecules that allow us to access a small insight into what's really going on? Because do they want us to question why we're here and figure it out over thousands, millions of years? Or was that I don't know, what's your opinion? Because
so generally I would just say there's a tendency to make things personal. Humans do this a lot. So everything is about me. So I don't think they have any particular intention for us at all. I think they'll end up finding that the thing that scares us about the gods that we've always suspected were there is not that they just don't mind what happens. You say, what do they want? I feel like there's a good chance they don't want anything. I feel like they have transcended having a nervous system and they no longer experience things like wants. Like you want water, you want sleep. I don't think that they relate to. I think it's very difficult to comprehend they probably wouldn't even have minds, but it's very difficult to comprehend the state at which they experience things. So I would say it is extremely impersonal. So we have to acknowledge that in some sense must be true because they allow all the negative things to happen. Right? They never put their foot down and stop that. So at some level, you have to sort of have a somber face as to whatever they are and know that they are allowing the worst possible things to happen and the best. I would say why does this particle show up? It might just be that there's imprecision in the system. Maybe things are sloppy. Maybe there's no way to build these smaller realities without some of the dust of the higher realities sometimes falling through the cracks. Maybe there's just these little weird quirks in the system where if you look at them, there's a kind of a mathematical non sequiturs where there isn't really supposed to be something you can inhale that takes you up, but it just happens to be that nature's a little sloppy like that. There may be even at their level, there may be a degree to which precision is no longer possible. It could be intentional, of course. Maybe these are seeds for things. Maybe if they're trying to raise the awareness inside that system in a very stable way, because they can't have everything suddenly change at once. Maybe the way that works is you just leave these little breadcrumbs. So once in a while, someone talks about it and the other people kind of know that it exists, but don't do it themselves. And over time, the information becomes more and more out in the open and the whole system sort of moves up the energy scale, so to speak.